We go. All right, we are on Judges chapter 11, verse 29. I think it would be helpful when we read if we could just once in a while put a little address in there. Like I'm on, verse 29, 31. So since our versions are different, it would help um, keeping up with where the different readings are. Um, so we are on verse 29. I'll go ahead and read it. It's a pretty short little verse 29. Then the Spirit of the Lord was upon Jephthah, and he passed through Gilead and Manasseh, and passed on to Mizpah of Gilead. From the Mizpah of Gilead, he passed on to the Ammonites. Here we go again, all those lands. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, If you will give the Ammonites into my hand, then whatever comes out from the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the Ammonites shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. I hope it's not one of his children. So Jephthah into his hand. So Jephthah crossed the Ammonites to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand, and he struck them from Or to the neighborhood of Minnith, 20 cities, and as far as Abel Keramim with a great blow. And so the Ammonites were subdued before the people of Israel. Then Jephthah came to his home in Mizpah, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with tambourines and with dances. She was his only child. Beside her, he had neither son nor daughter. And as soon as he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You have become the cause of great trouble to me. For I have opened my mouth to the Lord, and I cannot take back my vow. And she said to him, My father, you have opened your mouth to the Lord. Do to me according to what has come out your mouth, now that the Lord has avenged you on your enemies, on the Ammonites. So she said to her father, Let this thing be done for me. Leave me alone 2 months, that I may go up and down on the mountains and weep for my virginity, I and my companions. So he said, Go. And then he sent her away for 2 months, and she departed, she and her companions, and wept for her virginity on the mountains. And at the end of 2 months, she returned to her father, who did with her according to his vow that he had made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel that the daughters of Israel went year by year to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite 4 days in the year.
Christy, I
This
was
is
reading in,
so steeped in culture
Yeah.
with women. I mean, it's so entrenched. And, this was the biggest aspiration to not be a virgin. And then, of course, to have children. And I don't know. I keep thinking now that's thousands of years back. How much further have we come when you think about it?
Well,
I
what
got
blows
out
my
my,
mind is she left and came back. Like, I that says a lot about the daughter that she was willing. She was willing.
Mhm.
I
What?
got out my book, The Men and Women of the Bible, and I looked up this Jephthah,
Yeah.
and I was reading that yesterday afternoon, and it was saying that while Jephthah is described as a mighty man of valor and one upon whom the Spirit of the Lord descended, he is conspicuous as a man who, in all sincerity, made a rash vow. He vowed a vow to be fulfilled if the Lord would deliver the Ammonites to him. As a thanksgiving to God, he said he would offer up whatever came out of his house at his return from battle. Jephthah defeated the Ammonites, and on his return, his daughter and only child came out to meet him. He told her of his vow and declared he would not go back upon his word. the daughter begged for 2 months' respite in order to go away and bewail her virginity. On her return, the father fulfilled the vow. In those twilight, uncivilized times, there was a practice of the sacrifice of human beings at times of special stress. But whether Jephthah offered up his daughter as a human sacrifice or surrendered her to perpetual virginity in fulfillment of his vow may be debatable. We do know that it was the custom for daughters of Israel to lament the daughter of. We do know that it was the custom for the daughters of Israel to lament the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite for 4 days every year. And we can imagine how they would return softened, sobered, and sanctified as a result of their act of remembrance. For the preacher, these aspects can be developed. Jephthah was an outcast, and there's a reference to Judges 11, 1, 2. He rose to leadership, was moved by the Spirit, made a rash vow, saved Israel from his foes, and kept his vow. So it's basically saying, kind of like, okay, did he sacrifice her, or was it her virginity?
Well, I was just thinking too, like the fact that basically she was the sacrificial lamb for the nation. He made a rational vow. Like, what did he think was going to come out of the door of his house? It would be something that meant something if it was in his house.
It wasn't going to be an animal.
So she became like the sacrificial lamb for the nation. So I guess to me too, I'm thinking like you never make a rash vow, but also like where Bible says like let your yes be a yes and your no be a no, and if your word should be like what you say. If you say you're going to do something, then do it. Like he had to sacrifice his only daughter.
It seems to me very contradictory, though, that Israel said, how many times we're going to follow you, Lord, and you're our one and only God, blah, blah, blah. So you have an entire nation vowing to God over and over again and failing over and over again. But Jephthah had to keep his vow, and sacrifice his daughter one way or another. Like, so what would have happened if Jephthah had said, I never thought about it being my daughter. Please forgive me, Lord, and just like the Israelites, failed over and over. I mean, I'm not sure.
My commentary goes into a good bit about this, if you want to hear it.
Yeah.
Well, you probably have the same one, Kim. When
Oh.
Jephthah made his vow, did he stop to consider that a person, not a sheep or goat, might come out to meet him? Scholars are divided over the issue. Those who say Jephthah was considering human sacrifice use the following arguments. He was from an area where pagan religion and human sacrifice were common. In his eyes, it may not have seemed like a sin. That was number one. Number two, Jephthah may not have had a background in religious law. Perhaps he was ignorant of God's command against human sacrifice. Those who say Jephthah could not have been thinking about human sacrifice point to other evidence. One, as leader of the people, Jephthah must have been familiar with God's laws. Human sacrifice was clearly forbidden. No legitimate priest would have helped Jephthah carry out this vow if a person was to be sacrificed. Whatever Jephthah had in mind when he made the vow, did he or did he not sacrifice his daughter? Some think he did, because his vow was to make a burnt offering. Some think he did not, and they offer these two reasons. One, if the girl was to die, she would not have spent her last 2 months in the hills, and God would not have honored a vow based on a wicked practice. So, Kim, God wouldn't have honored that vow. He wouldn't have had to do it. That's what I took from that.
my commentary adds to that one more sentence. It said, in 11, it said, some think she never married, not that she died, implying she was set apart for service to God, not killed.
Hmm.
So,
Like a nun.
yeah. Well, that it makes more sense that after you saying that it was against God's will for human sacrifice and that it would be of service to him that she was not killed. I just can't imagine. I don't know.
I agree with you, Kim. It's like all the times that the Israelites turned their back on God, and then he can't come along and say, "Oh, wait, I should not have said that because
Right.
I'm not going to sacrifice my daughter for some stupid thing I said."
Right. Right.
And
I know.
wouldn't God have said, "Oh, yeah, you realize that," you know?
Yes. Yeah.
I was dealing with two emergencies while you guys were talking. I think that that people's word was very important back then. So what he said, and he had to follow through.
But the Israelite, we were arguing though, or not arguing, we were discussing though that the Israelites vowed to God over and over again their loyalty and didn't follow through.
Yeah, and then they dealt with the consequences of that.
Yeah, Jephthah had already received the victory.
And here again, what Lori was reading, any reputable priest who was following God's law and knows that that was not, you don't sacrifice humans. What reputable priest is going to come along and say, "Oh yeah, let's do this"?
Yeah, but you got to remember back then, the culture they were in and coming out of did sacrifice humans. So
The pagans. The
yeah.
pagans that they lived around.
Yes.
But not
Right.
the
But I'm
Jews.
saying like they would, like we look at that and we're like, oh, we would never, but we don't live in that culture where that's normal. Like for
Or
them,
do we?
they that would have been normal in the culture around them that they were living in.
My
I'm going to
commentary
believe.
had one
I'm-
more sentence. Go ahead, Kim.
I'm going to believe she just lived a life of service to God, and she never married. It makes more sense.
What did yours say, Janet?
My commentary had one more sentence. Says Japheth suffered hard consequences for his decision. Even if she lived, he still lost her and any children she might have had. So he lost heritage.
Oh yeah, he would have lost the generations after him.
Mm-hmm.
All right, are we ready to go into John MacArthur?
Okay. 11:29. The Spirit came upon Jephthah. That the Lord graciously empowered Jephthah for war on behalf of his people does not mean that all of the warrior's decisions were of God's wisdom. The rash vow is an example. 11:30. Made a vow to the Lord. This was a custom among generals to promise the God of their worship something of great value as a reward for that God's giving them victory. 11:31. I will offer it. Some interpreters reason that Jephthah offered his daughter as a living sacrifice in perpetual virginity. With this idea, verse 31 would mean, quotes, shall surely be the Lord's, or quotes, I will offer it up as a burnt offering. The view sees only perpetual virginity in verses 37 to 40 and rejects his offering a human sacrifice as being against God's revealed will. Reference
Can you say,
Deuteronomy.
can you say that again?
The view sees only perpetual virginity in verses 37 to 40 and rejects his offering a human sacrifice as being against God's revealed will. Deuteronomy 12:31. So that's like what Lori was reading, that God, that he would not accept the human sacrifice of it.
But the virginity.
Yes. The focus mainly being the virginity. And if you really think about those verses, that's what it focuses on, how they went to the mountain, and now they every 4 years or something, they memorialize that. It really didn't go into detail of the human sacrifice.
True.
I don't know.
Well, it reminded me when John and Amber were in Africa as missionaries. That's my son-in-law and daughter-in-law. There was a witch doctor there, and one of the things that they would do is kidnap virgin women. And while they were there, this happened. They took her into the woods, and they took a like iron pole and went up inside her and just ripped her to pieces and got her blood. Left her in the jungle to die, but she didn't die. She ended up coming out, and they were able to get her away to a hospital because they would have went after her and killed her. They thought that she would die, but it was really important to get that virgin blood, which I find interesting because basically that must have been a custom then too, because she was a virgin. The focus being on virginity.
Then leads to with Christ, his mother was a virgin.
Good connection.
And there's always blood involved.
Oh yeah.
Even Jason said that on Sunday, how the river was turned to blood, but it wasn't changed back to the river.
Yes.
On the other hand, since he was 1, beyond the Jordan River, 2, far from the tabernacle, 3, a hypocrite in religious devotion, 4, familiar with human sacrifice among the other nations, 5, influenced by such superstition, and 6, wanting victory badly, he most likely meant a literal human burnt offering. The translation in verse 31 is quotes and, not quotes or. His act came in an era of bizarre things, even inconsistency by leaders whom God otherwise empowered. 11:34, his daughter coming out to meet him. She was thus to be the sacrifice pledge. 11:35, alas, Jephthah indicated the pain felt by her father in having to take the life of his only daughter to satisfy his pious but unwise pledge. This is all very confusing.
Okay, so Deuteronomy says that God finds human sacrifice an abomination. So I'm confused, and I'm probably confused because I'm half in and out. So if he's finding this an abomination, then they went ahead and sacrificed her. I'm confused. Did I miss something?
The
What did you
question
say?
is whether or not they really sacrificed her or just set her apart for God's service. Right, Kim?
Oh, you're thinking maybe she remained a virgin for the rest of her life.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't think they sacrificed her. I think they just kept her a virgin and she never married.
Maybe that's the sacrifice.
Oh, that was maybe that
Right.
is the sacrifice. Okay, that makes sense.
That's what I'm choosing to believe.
Because it
She
says here she
returned
would
to her
never
father.
marry.
She did. She returned to her father, who did with her according to the vow he made. She had never known a man, and it became a custom in Israel. Yeah, it does kind of sound like that. Well, I guess we'll keep going through the commentaries and see what else happens.
Well, and the other thing is, if she said to her father, okay, he made this vow, and if she said to her father, okay, you got to keep that. If she knew he was talking sacrifice, human sacrifice, I'm not going to say, okay, Dad, let's go for it. You know,
I'm going to go hang out with my girlfriends and then I'll be back.
Yeah, I wouldn't have come back.
I wouldn't either.
no, even if I'm going to say, okay, I'll be gone for 2 months and I'll see you when I get back and we'll do this thing. No.
But like Janet said, it would stop his lineage. He would have no heirs
Yeah.
if she remained a virgin for the rest of her life.
And we discussed that earlier about that, how important that was, that ancestry.
Right.
I'm going to pause this recording for a minute so we can pray for somebody, if you guys don't mind.
Oh, go ahead.
Let me pause
Okay.
it to give details. Thank you. Okay, so we're picking back up. I'm sorry.
Okay, so it's a father in despair. While going out to battle, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. It was certainly acceptable to God for the Jews to make vows, provided they obeyed the laws that he had given through Moses to govern the use of vows. And there are references to Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Vows were completely voluntary, but the Lord expected the people to fulfill them. And a reference to Ecclesiastes. Jephthah's vow was really a bargain with the Lord. If God would give the Israelites victory over the Ammonites, Jephthah would sacrifice to the Lord whatever came out of his house when he arrived home in Mizpah. God did give him the victory, and Jephthah kept his promise. But what was his promise, and how did he keep it? What actually happened to Jephthah's daughter, his only child? The vow. The Authorized King James Version reads, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into mine hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. Judges 11:30 and 31. The New American Standard Bible translates this verse to say, If thou wilt indeed give the sons of Ammon into my hand, then it shall be whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the sons of Ammon. It shall be the Lord's, and I will offer it up as a burnt offering. The New International Version translates it to say, If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. The questions. The more you study Jephthah's vow, the more puzzling it becomes. He simply could have said, Lord, if you help me defeat the enemy, when I get home, I will offer you a generous burnt offering. But he couched his vow in ambiguous terms. How did he know who or what would come out of the door of his house? What if the first thing to greet him happened to be an unclean animal that was unacceptable to God? Then he couldn't fulfill his vow. The Hebrew word translated whatsoever, King James Version, or whatever, NASB, is masculine and suggests that he expected to meet a person. Hold on, there's a note. It's not important. But what if that person turned out to be a neighbor's child or a total stranger? What right did Jephthah have to take either life and thereby offer to God a sacrifice that cost him nothing? And there's a reference to 2 Samuel 24:24. Furthermore, surely Jephthah knew that Jehovah didn't approve of or accept human sacrifices. Jephthah gave evidence of familiarity with the Old Testament scriptures, and he would have known about Abraham and Isaac in Genesis 22 and the commandments in the law. references to Leviticus and Deuteronomy. Granted, the period of the judges was a spiritually dark era in Israel's history, but the Jews did many things that were wrong. But it's doubtful that Jephthah's friends and neighbors would have permitted him to slay his own daughter in order to fulfill a foolish vow. There's a note here. Baal worship was the prevalent religion among the Canaanites, and it didn't include the sacrifice of children. The Ammonites put their children through the fire as part of their worship of Moloch. 18 years before, the people of Israel had turned to heathen gods for this, and the Lord had severely chastened them. It's unthinkable that Jephthah would adopt a heathen practice in order to get God's help when the nation had suffered so greatly for adopting heathen practices. For God to honor such a thing would make people ask, if heathen practices are so evil, then why did you send all that suffering? I'll find where I was at. King Saul's soldiers didn't let him kill his own son Jonathan, who had violated his father's foolish vow. And there's a reference to 1 Samuel. And where would Jephthah offer his daughter as a sacrifice? Surely he knew that the Lord accepted sacrifices only at the tabernacle altar, and they had to be offered by the Levitical priest. He would have to travel to Shiloh to fulfill his vow. And it's doubtful that even the most unspiritual priest would offer a human sacrifice on God's sanctified altar, victory or no victory. In fact, if people knew that Jephthah was going to Shiloh to slay his daughter, they probably would have stopped him along the way and kidnapped the girl. A national hero like Jephthah couldn't easily hide what he was doing, and surely the story would have spread quickly among the people during the 2-month waiting period. Even if he made it safely to Shiloh, Jephthah could have learned from any priest that paying proper amount of money could have redeemed his daughter. A reference to Leviticus there. As a successful soldier who had just returned from looting the enemy, Jephthah could easily have paid the redemption price. Other pertinent questions arise. In spite of Numbers 30:1-2, would God take seriously a vow that violated both human rights and divine law? Would a spirit-empowered man committed to the Lord even make such a vow? The more I ponder these questions, the more perplexing his vow becomes, and the more convinced I am that Jephthah didn't promise to offer any human sacrifice to the Lord and did not kill his own daughter. Solutions. More than one expositor has pointed out that the little word "and" in the phrase, "and I will offer it up," can be translated "or." In the Hebrew, it's the letter "wa," W-A-W, which usually means "and."
Wait a minute, say that again.
In the Hebrew, it's the letter "wa," W-A-W, which usually means "and." And it says, see the beginning of Psalms 119:41 for an example of what the Hebrew "wa" looks like.
But when it's saying "and" meant what? It could mean "or."
Could mean "or," can be translated "or."
Okay.
If we take this approach, then the vow was twofold. Whatever met him when he returned home would be dedicated to the Lord, if a person, or sacrificed to the Lord, if an animal. Since he was met by his daughter, Jephthah gave her to the Lord to serve him at the tabernacle. References to Exodus and 1 Samuel. She remained a virgin, which meant that she would not know the joys of motherhood and perpetuate her father's inheritance in Israel. This would be reason enough for her and her friends to spend 2 months grieving, for every daughter wanted a family and every father wanted grandchildren to maintain the family inheritance. Nowhere in the text are we told that Jephthah actually killed his daughter, nor do we find anybody bewailing the girl's death. The emphasis in Judges 11:37-40 is the fact that she remained a virgin. It's difficult to believe that the daughters of Israel would establish a custom to celebrate the awful sacrifice of a human being, but we can well understand that they would commemorate the devotion and obedience of Jephthah's daughter in helping her father fulfill his vow. She deserves to stand with Isaac as a faithful child who was willing to obey both father and God, no matter what the cost. And then there's another footnote right here. If Jephthah was going to kill his daughter, he would want her home with himself and not running around on the mountains with her girlfriends. Furthermore, why would the girl lament her virginity if she expected to die? Of what significance is virginity if you're heading for the grave? It seems likely that she would have lamented her impending death instead. Perhaps she was lamenting the fact that she hadn't married and therefore did not leave her father any grandchildren. But if that were the case, her father should have been doing the grieving because marriages were arranged by family, not by individuals involved. That's it.
All right,
So Kim,
go ahead.
you're right.
Is Kim the one that figured that out?
She's the one that said she wanted to believe that she just
Sacrificed her
never
life.
became a mother, and
That is a sacrifice. That's huge. Okay, 29 through 31. And I got to apologize. I said about us when we read about marking where we were in the scripture, and then I didn't do it when I was reading originally. Okay, the Spirit of the Lord came on Jephthah, 29 through 31. There was a supernatural endowment to fulfill a particular task. Jephthah was so intent on defeating Israel's enemy that he wanted to let God know that he was serious about following through on the job. He vowed that if God handed over the Ammonites to him, he would offer the first thing that walked out of his home as a burnt offering to the Lord. I guess looking up the meaning of burnt offering too, like we're thinking of fire, but the meaning of burnt offering is like, what is the meaning of the burnt offering? 30, which is in Leviticus, I'd have to look it up. 32 through 40. God gave Jephthah victory, and when he came home, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with tambourines and dancing. Who knows what he was expecting to walk out when he made the vow, but it was his only child, his daughter. If it had been an animal, he would have sacrificed it on the altar. But since it was a person, she would be dedicated to the Lord's service for the rest of her life. Psalm 68:25, like a nun or a priest. She submitted to her fate, but she wept over her virginity. She would not be able to marry and have a family. Jephthah's condition for leading this army was to be made the leader of Gilead. Clearly, he had aspirations to be king, to build a family dynasty. But until the Israelites were willing to look to God as their king, he didn't want them to have a human king, because unless a government is accountable to God, men in power will act like gods. Consider Gideon, Abimelech, Japheth, and later Saul. God blocked any dynasty that would be man-centered and not God-centered. So when Jephthah's daughter, his only offspring, came out of his house to meet him, his dynasty plans were thwarted. Though God calls us to obey governing authorities, see Romans 13:1, we are to give our ultimate allegiance to him because he is sovereign. Acts 5:29. So you were right. I didn't think about that too. Like I was thinking his only daughter, but it was his only child. Any other thoughts?
There's one more thing I had sort of highlighted in my notes in my Bible. It says, God does not want promises for the future, but obedience for today.
Wow. Yeah.
Say that again, Janet. I want to write that down. God
God does not want promises for the future, but obedience for today.
That's almost like trying to wager with God. You know, if you do this for me today, I'll do this for you.
That's what mine says. Have you ever promised to do something for the Lord if he will grant your request?
Mm-hmm.
I think get caught up in that. God doesn't work that way. He wants us to be loyal and obedient constantly. His answer to our prayers reflects his perfect will for us.
Well, I'm skimming through Leviticus, and it's primarily Leviticus 1 and 2, 3, 4 through 7. It's primarily animals and in some cases grain.
The AI overview says in the Bible, a burnt offering represented, this makes total sense, a gift to God, a total commitment to God, a symbolic offering of one's life. That makes total sense.
Yeah, I was reading too. I agree with you, Cindy, because I was reading it just goes into detail how they present the animal. But in the commentary at the bottom, the purpose was to reveal a high and holy God who should be loved and worshiped. God's laws and sacrifices were intended to bring out devotion of the heart. The ceremonies and rituals were simply the best way for these people to focus their hearts on him.
So the burnt offering wasn't really actually burning, it was the actual commitment of the person's life. It said that the worshiper offered a valuable animal to God as a gift, communicating that the animal belonged to God.
Well, and it says that too, that a sacrifice is the only way to approach God and restore a relationship with him. And Jephthah wasn't trying to restore a relationship. He was just showing devotion.
Yeah, it's so when we're in Leviticus now actually, but like when we studied that, like that sacrifice was a I can't say the word, perpetuary. It was like a transference, like so it says burnt offerings were a I can't say it, Cindy. Perpetuary sacrifice in ancient Israel. For God to maintain his judgment, he must punish sin. So he gets us our lives, but we also get him.
Well, I'm going to push back on this a little bit. I feel like we're trying to reason, and all of us, okay, whatever, at commentaries, and explain away the sacrifice. I think he killed her. I'm sorry. But I understand. I get what everybody's saying. And I mean, it makes perfect sense what Janet said. He wouldn't have a legacy. But I don't know. I think he killed her. That's me.
It's possible.
You're entitled to that, Cindy, to that interpretation.
I have a question mark on it, Cindy, because I don't think we can be sure. Like, I also have a question mark on that. I do think that the burnt offering being a gift of total commitment to God.
Yeah.
So Jesus was, how do you say it? Propitiatory, and he did get sacrificed as an atonement for us.
Yeah, he did.
Spell that again.
PRO. We've had this word before, and I can't never say it. PROPITIATORY. A propitiatory.
Propitiatory. You got it.
Okay.
Propitiatory, I think.
Sacrifice. So isn't that like that's an atonement, right? That's like a transference of sin to something. Right?
But this wasn't the deal about sinning. It was a deal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was
a vow.
And I agree with you, Lori. God would not condone that at all. But yet, this guy's in the, the Hall of Fame of Faith. So I don't know.
Well, and according, maybe I'm saying this wrong because I'm saying transference, but this is just saying a gift to God, showing total commitment to God, symbolic of offering of one's life. So maybe not transference of sin, but representing the offering of one's life. The animal would have.
It could be.
I think
I was just reading about.
If you read this story without a concordance, if you just read this and you don't have a concordance, it says he sacrificed his daughter. With all these concordances, we're getting other
Input.
Opinions.
My Bible says he sacrificed her.
And it says in verse 31 at the end, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering.
And I don't like that ending, but that's the way
Either. Yeah.
the Bible says.
I'm reading in one of the concordances I have, if this is true, it does not mean that it was right for him to do so, but Jephthah's rough background may account for his lack of spiritual discernment. We have so many that are so far from not even knowing who God is. And pertaining to this.
I don't even think the commentaries really make it clear.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of I can see where there's a lot of things that says why it would have happened or why it wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like Worsby was saying, what if some neighbor would have walked out of his house?
Right.
You know, it wasn't even anybody in his family. Are you going to sacrifice somebody that's a neighbor? You know, or somebody else's kid? What's that family going to say if you sacrifice their kid because they walked out of your house and you say, oh no, I made a vow to God, so I got to take your kid? I don't know. I think it's just
that would have been murder at that point.
Yeah.
Right.
Or the animal that wasn't spotless, like they said. He wouldn't have been able to offer that.
But in 29, it said the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. That was before he made this vow.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's right, Julie.
All right, I gotta go. Kenny wants to go vote.
All right.
who's he voting for?
Yeah.
The right one.
Okay, I was going to say, make sure before you take him.
Hey, we're recording here. This concludes the reading of God's word for today. See you ladies tomorrow morning.
Sorry, bye.
Keep us updated on Autumn.
Oh.